All right, good evening and welcome back to our study of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's Igros Kodesh, letters that were written by the Rebbe. Many of you took a journey with me for the month leading up to Yud Aleph Nisan this year. Yud Aleph Nisan is the Rebbe's birthday. And we did 30 letters in 30 days, every single day. Even Shabbos, where we couldn't have a class, we did a double class on Thursdays to make up for it. We learned another letter from the Rebbe. And Baruch Hashem, the response was amazing. And people said, when are you going to do it again? After Yud Aleph Nisan, when we finished, people said, when are you going to do it again? And I said, you'll find out. Okay, so you're finding out. Today is Gimel Sivan, which is 30 days before Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe's yahrzeit. We're not going to do 30 letters in 30 days. That was a little bit crazy. But we're going to do a letter a week from now until Gimel Tammuz. And the way we did it last time is we went through one chelik, one volume of the Igros. This time we're going to jump around a little bit because we're going to follow a topic. We're going to learn letters on the topic of hiskashrus, the relationship between a Rebbe and a chassid. And hopefully this will be part of our preparing ourselves properly for Gimel Tammuz. And as the Rebbe expressed regarding Yud Shvat, the yahrzeit of his Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, that our most sincere and ardent hope is that Mashiach will be here before Gimel Tammuz and it will no longer be a yahrzeit. So let's jump into our first letter. Somebody told me, how can you start the letter, the first class, Thursday night before a 3-day Yom Tif? The women are all cooking. I said, what do you think you're supposed to listen to while you're cooking? So I'm sure there are people right now who are listening to this while cooking. All right. Can you make a blueberry cheesecake for me? I don't know. Okay. Anyways, the letter that we're going to learn tonight is from the year Tofshin Tes. This is before the Rebbe is officially accepting the Nesius. This is before the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The first few volumes of Igros are letters from before the Nesius. This is from Chelik Gimel, and it's letter Tof Mem Hey, 445. And it's written to an illustrious mashpia, R Shlomo Chaim Kesselman. And I think before I start to read the letter, I want to tell you one thing about Shlomo Chaim, because this letter is, I'll just say it, it's leveling a fairly harsh critique. Not, and the Rebbe makes this very clear, not directed at any particular individual. He's writing to Shlomo Chaim, but he says this is not about any one individual. It's about the chasidim in general in the community where Shlomo Chaim was living at the time, and we'll talk about where and when this all happened. However, because it's a critical tone, that the letter is written in a critical tone, I just want to tell you something about Shlomo Chaim so you should understand what kind of a person we're talking about, and specifically in the area of connecting Jews to the Rebbe. Because that's what this whole letter is about. It's about the Rebbe's call to chasidim to connect more Jews to the Rebbe. Shlomo Chaim was a mashpia from a very young age. In fact, he was first appointed as mashpia by the Rebbe Rashab, by the 5th Rebbe of Chabad. He was born in Tofresh Nun Dalet, that's 1894. And he went on to be a mashpia in the times of the Frierdiker Rebbe as well as in the times of the Rebbe. He passed away in 1971, and he was a mashpia in Lud, in the Chabad yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, And the particular story I want to tell you was a story that happened at one of his fabrengens, one of his famous fabrengens in Lud. There were many non-Lubavitcher Bachrim, particularly Litvischer Bachrim, who were attracted to these fabrengens. And from these fabrengens, many of these young men became Chabad. There's a whole lineage of Chabad families who come from these Bachrim who were attracted to Shlomo Chaim's fabrengens. So at one particular fabrengen, and this story was told by one of Shlomo Chaim's Talmidim, by someone who himself became a great mashpia, Reb Melech Tzvibel, who was mashpia in Morristown. So he was a bacher at this fabrengen, and there was a Litvischer bacher who, and there were many Litvischer bachrim who would come to these fabrengens, but this particular fabrengen, there's a Litvischer bacher, and he was giving some pushback to Shlomo Chaim. Shlomo Chaim was fabrenging about his kashrus, that we have to connect ourselves to the Nasi, to the Nasi Adar. And this bacher says, I'm connected to Abaye Verava. From the Gemara, the great Amoraim, Abaye Verava. So the bacher was saying, like, yeah, it's very nice, he's kashrus, and you're making a point that this is an indispensable part of Yiddishkeit, to connect yourself to a Talmid Chacham and to a tzaddik. No problem, but I have his kashrus. I'm a makusher of Abaye Verava from the Gemara. So Shlomo Chaim says to this bacher, he says, you want to be connected to Abaye Verava, but who says Abaye Verava want to be connected to you? That, he said, is the difference. That not only do chasidim want to connect to the Rebbe, but the Rebbe, as Nasi, wants to be connected to each of them. So it's very easy to say, oh, I picked this person to be makusher to. Who says it's reciprocal? The whole idea of a Nasi, of a Rebbe, of Rebbe being Reish Beis Yud, Rosh B'nai Yisrael, a head, like a head is connected to a body as one organism. The whole idea is that it's a two-way street. The relationship is reciprocal. So that's just a story about Shlomo Chaim. Now we're going to hear the Rebbe criticizing some stuff that's going on that Shlomo Chaim was involved in, and it's pretty severe, but buckle up, and we'll get through it, and we'll be better for it. Okay, here we go. Oh, and I also want to mention something. The format, when we did 30 letters in 30 days, was 30 minutes, 3-3-30. 30-30-30, yeah, 30-30-30. 30 letters, 30 days, 30 minutes, yeah. So that was the format. This is not the format anymore. I cannot promise you how long this is going to take. This is a particularly long letter. I'm even going to skip a portion of this letter, and I'm guessing it's going to take me well over an hour. Let's see. Let's see what happens. I think it's going to take well over an hour. All right. Baruch Hashem, Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, Tov Shin Tes. Everyone knows what Chamisha Asa B'Shvat is, yeah? Well, the next line tells you. Rosh Hashanah Leilanis. The tree New Year. New Year for trees. Ha'odem Eitz Hasadeh. The Rebbe puts in there that it's the tree holiday, but the tree holiday isn't just for the trees, it's for the tree in all of us. Ki Odem Eitz Hasadeh, like it says in Parshas Shoftim. There's a tree-like aspect of all of us, and we can learn from the trees. So Tree New Year is also our New Year. Harava chassid avosik v'chassid ish yirei Elokim, novin u'maskil v'chulu, mereinu harav shleima chayim shiyichye, shalom uvracha. So the letter is addressed to Reb Shlomo Chaim Kesselman. So here's what I'm going to do. The Rebbe actually broke up the letter into 6 chapters. Chapter 1, or Ois Aleph, is a mazel tov for Shlomo Chaim's daughter becoming engaged. I'm going to skip that. Chapter 2 is base is that I've been mentioning a kuntras, a pamphlet that of a mimer of the Previous Rebbe that he's enclosing in the letter. Is Gimel, or chapter 3, is the Rebbe confirming receipt of the list of donors to a certain fund, which we're going to be speaking about at length in this letter. Is Dalet, or chapter 4, is confirmation of receipt of other funds that were sent for other projects. I'm not going to get into this. There's so much to be said about all of this, but I'm not going to do it. Is Hey, chapter 5, was omitted entirely. And we spoke about this in our previous classes, that when the letters were, all of these letters were published from the archival copy that was retained by the Secretariat. And in many cases, private information was removed or redacted to protect the privacy of individuals. So I don't know what chapter 5 was about. It could have been anything. Doesn't necessarily mean it was personal about Shlomo Chaim. It could have been personal about somebody he knew. Who knows? There's no way to know what it was, but it was taken out. Okay. And then we start with Ois Vav, chapter 6. And this is what we're going to focus on. And this is going to take us a while, like I said. I don't know how long it's going to take us, but yeah, it's going to take a while. So let's do this. And if you're following in the PDF that we prepared, it's on chapter 4. I mean, on page 4. If you go to page 4, so you'll see paragraph F, right? F is so confusing. F is Vav. Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, A, Vav, A, B, C, D, E, F. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Okay. Vav. Ma shekosov al dvar I efshorius ho'aveda b'miktzea nifne bein anshei ha'ir lavad anash v'hatmimim. Regarding what you said, that it's impossible to do anything about nifne. What's nifne? Among the people of the city. Which city? An exception for anash. What's anash? Let's explain this. Nifne is a fund with an illustrious tradition and backstory and history. Nifne is actually not a real word. It's a word in code. And the code developed because of persecution. Well, I shouldn't say that. The use of the code in this context developed because of persecution. The actual code itself is a well-known code among Jews called the mezuzah code. You ever noticed on the back of a mezuzah, you'll find letters forming words, nonsense words. Kuzu, v'muchsos, kuzu. What is that? Those are the words Hashem, Alekecha Hashem, bumped up by one letter. So the Yud of Yud Kei Vav Kei gets bumped up and becomes the next letter of Chaf. And then the Hey of Yud Kei Vav Kei gets bumped up one letter higher to the next letter and becomes a Vav, and so on and so forth. So the mezuzah code is when you take each letter of a word and you bump it up one letter. So nifne is the mezuzah code way of saying maimad. Now, what's maimad? Maimad means to stand up, like amida, standing. So maimad means money that was collected for financially supporting a Rebbe to be used by the Rebbe as discretionary funds. And because, obviously, for obvious reasons, fundraising, especially under oppressive regimes, had to be done very often in secrecy, when chasidim would write about the collection of Maimud, they developed a code. They wouldn't refer to it as Maimud, they would refer to it as Nifne, and everyone understood that that was code for fundraising for these funds that go to the Rebbe. So that's what the word Nifne means. Now, it's hard to explain the importance of Maimud. I think by the end of this letter, it'll become very, very clear how important it is. But at first glance, it seems like a funny thing, because let's be honest here. Let's say it as it is. From a cynical point of view, fundraising it can be a turnoff. Like, oh, so here's the sales pitch, the solicitation. Now they're asking for my money. But traditionally, it was understood that when a chassid gives maimad, when he gives money, his hard-earned money, to the Rebbe, that is a form of connection that cannot be achieved through other ways of connecting. Yes, there are many ways of connecting to a Rebbe, and the Rebbe will talk about this in the letter, that there's the spiritual connection and there's the material connection. Giving money, hard-earned money, to the Rebbe's discretionary fund is an act of connecting oneself to the Rebbe in a very special way. And in some ways, we bypass some of the problem areas of human experience. Meaning, you learn the Rebbe's Torah. That's your seichel, you're using your mind. Okay, but you have your own subjectivity, so who knows how you filter it. Or even your midos, your emotions. You have a feeling of connection to the Rebbe. But again, it's so subjective. It's filtered through your own experiences and your limitations. But then there's something called action, ma'aseh b'poel. And that sort of bypasses all the subjectivity, and it's real, it's indisputable. And you could say, well, following the Rebbe's directives, going and doing what the Rebbe told you to do is also action. That's true. But this is something that's even more fundamental, because it's even bypassing if you go and you do something, the Rebbe's directive, it's still sort of a religious thing you're doing. And it has, religious in the sense of you're doing it with certain intention and with certain deeper understanding. But when you give money, when you go and you earn the money and then you give the money away, there's something so basic, there's something so elemental about it that you can't mess up. You just can't mess up. It reminds me of the story. Someone actually, a gvir, a philanthropist, a rich man who was giving a lot of money, he once told the Alter Rebbe, he said, I'm not giving tzedakah right now because I realized that I don't have the right kavanah, that when I give tzedakah, I have certain egotistical feeling about it. So until my kavanah is more pure, I'm gonna take a break from tzedakah. So the Alter Rebbe said that listen, your kavanah when you give money to the poor man may be questionable, but I can assure you, the kavanah of the poor man when he eats is 100% kosher. Don't worry. Like, in other words, you can't mess it up, because at the end of the day, it's all about the practical thing. You did it, and it benefits somebody. So it has a certain purity to it. And it was always understood that a chassid, even if you connect to the Rebbe in all the other ways, you have to have this as a part of the whole hiskashrus connection. I'll tell you a very interesting story that I don't think is very well known about the Alter Rebbe's meeting with Rabbi Nachman Mebreslev. I don't think a lot of people realize that they had a meeting. In 1810, we're talking about a few years before the Alter Rebbe's Histalkos, he was traveling around Russia, and he actually went to Breslov. This is before Rabbi Nachman moved to Uman, where he passed away, and that's, of course, where he's buried. It's a very well-known pilgrimage location. But this is when Rabbi Nachman was still in Breslov. So the Alter Rebbe came, and it was very interesting. At their meeting, there was a wealthy Jew who was a big supporter of Rabbi Nachman, and Rabbi Nachman said to this Gvir, this wealthy Jew, "Gib tzedakah for an emerson Talmid Chacham," referring to the Alter Rebbe. Give tzedakah to a true Torah scholar. And he pulled out a coin called a rendel, which was an expensive coin, like $100 bill, and he gave it to the Alter Rebbe. And the Menachem said, "Das git men for an emerson Talmid Chacham? That's what you give to a true Torah scholar?" So the Gvir gave another coin. And Reb Nachman commented in a similar way that it was insufficient. So he gave another coin, and another, and another, and it repeated itself until the Gvir had given the Alter Rebbe 10 of these very large coins, which was a large amount of money. It was more money, I believe it was more money than Reb Nachman himself received as his monthly stipend from the community. So it was a pretty good fundraising visit. But then the conversation shifted, and it's very interesting. The question that Reb Nachman asked the Alter Rebbe, and then the connection of the answer back to what had happened earlier with the giving the tzedakah. Nachman ben Breslov asked the Alter Rebbe, "Is it true what they say that you have 80,000 chasidim?" Which was a lot of chasidim. You know that the Talmidei HaMagid, the different disciples of the Maggid had 120 disciples, the Baal Shem Tov had 60, Maggid had double the number. They all took over different areas. Generally speaking, they geographically divvied up Eastern Europe, and they would teach Chassidus in their style. And so Nachman ben Breslov asks the Alter Rebbe, "Is it true what I hear that you have 80,000 Chassidim, which is a big number?" So Alter Rebbe says, "Yes, but let me explain. I'll explain the number." You have to understand how we do accounting over here. He says, "I have many Chassidim who are school teachers. And each of these school teachers keeps on his desk a pushka. It's a pushka, a little canister for putting donations, for the collection of Maimed. Maimed means what we were speaking about, funds that are sent to a Rebbe as discretionary funds for the Rebbe. So in each one of those classrooms, you have all these children who are giving Maimed money, and they will never oppose me." He said they will never become misnagdim because they've given Maimed money. So they are counted in the reckoning of the 80,000 Chassidim. Very interesting question, interesting answer, and then interesting the connection of the answer back to what had just happened a minute earlier with Nachman ben Breslov getting the Gvir to give the Alter Rebbe more money. The Alter Rebbe was saying that when somebody gives Maimed money, it's not just about the money. Everyone always says it's not about the money, right? If they tell you it's not about the money, it's about the money, right? But in this case, what is the Alter Rebbe saying? The connection that's formed, even by these children, to the Rebbe through giving Maimed money is a foundation for a lifelong connection, for a lifelong relationship. That may be where it begins, but once the relationship is formed, it's sort of cemented and it's locked in, and it can only grow from there, not deteriorate. So it's a very powerful concept, the idea of this connection through the giving of Maimed, which in this letter we're going to refer to again as Nifne, Okay. Yeah, this is going to take more than an hour. It's going to be an hour and a half. Okay. So we got through one sentence. We didn't get through one sentence yet. What does it mean? You tell me that it's impossible to collect nifne from the people of the city except for Anash. People of the city, what city? Paris. R Shlomo Chaim, as well as many other Chabad chasidim who had escaped Soviet Russia, were at that time living in Paris. There was, now I'm not talking about today's Paris. I'm not talking about all the chasidim that Mullah Azimov Alav Shalom made. I'm talking about 1940s, post-war, 1947 is when the Rebbe himself went back and visited. We'll talk about that actually. When the Rebbe himself went back to Paris after the war to bring his mother, Rebbe Tzimchana, and there was a community of Anash. We're talking about their original Anash from Russia. We're talking about the people who were Chabad back in Russia and who escaped Russia. And where did they end up? For whatever reason. I mean, Hashgacha Pratis. A lot of them ended up in Paris. Okay? I mean, we'll talk about it actually, the history of how they ended up in Paris, because actually a lot of them ended up in Germany at a DP camp, and then from the DP camp in Germany, they ended up in Paris. We'll get to that. Be'ezus Hashem. But just understand, we're talking about a group of what we call Gezhe chasidim, people who were Chabad back in Russia, perhaps for many generations. They end up in Paris. And the Rebbe refers to that these are people who saw not only the Frierdiker Rebbe, they saw the Rebbe Rashab. These were people who learned in Teimchet Tamimim. The Rebbe refers to all of this. So we're talking about the cream of the crop, the real Gezhe chasidim from illustrious lineages. They end up, after World War II, in Paris. There's so much more to this history to fill in, but I don't want the letter to take 3 hours. They're living in Paris. This is 1949. Now, you know, Shlomo Chaim ends up in Eretz Yisrael. So, and he refers to another chassid later by name in the letter to Ben Zion Shem Tov, who ended up in England. So they're not all going to stay in Paris. Most of them don't stay in Paris. But at this point, there's a lot of them living in Paris. And the Rebbe says to him, to Shlomo Chaim, you tell me in your letter that you have found it impossible to accomplish anything with the people of the city, with the Parisians, regarding collection of nifne, except for Anash and Tamimim, meaning to say, we know from this letter, remember one of the earlier chapters in the letter was about the receipts for the nifne. So money was just sent in for nifne. But what the Rebbe is saying is the only people who contributed were Lubavitchers. And I want to know, you're in a big city. Paris is a big city with a lot of Jews. Where's the nifne? Why am I not writing receipts for nifne from all these non-Lubavitchers? Where is that? So that's what the Rebbe is referring to. And that's really the main emphasis of this whole letter. It's about reaching out beyond Anash, beyond the tight-knit Chabad community, and connecting regular Jews to the Rebbe, specifically through nifne. Now, I want to just share one other piece of background here, which I think helps to flesh things out. This letter, as I mentioned, is 1949, and we said what date it was. Remember? Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, tree holiday. There's a letter from 5 days earlier, from Yud Shvat. Interesting date, Yud Shvat, but it's Yud Shvat Tafshin Tes. It's exactly a year before the Frierdiker Rebbe's Histalkus. Yud Shvat Tafshin Tes. And it's 3 letters earlier in this very same chelik of Igris. The Rebbe is writing to a shliach in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to Yisroel Meir Altain. And he says, I got the list for the Chalukas Hashas, and I see that nobody's on it but you and Sholem Posner. What are we talking about here? Chalukas Hashas is something that goes back to the times of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe writes about it in the Igeres HaKodesh. I made a bracha earlier, before we started filming. Chalukas Hashas is a Chabad Hasidic enactment, going back to the Alter Rebbe, that each community should finish the entire Shas together every year, from Yud Tes Kislev to Yud Tes Kislev. So apparently, Rabbi Altein had sent in a list of the Chalukas Hashas from Pittsburgh, and nobody was on it but him and Shalom Posner. Now, I wouldn't have gotten this on my own, but somebody explained to me, and after he said it, was like, yeah, no brainer. Basically, what he was saying, it's actually one of the Posner Einiklach explained it to me. If you're listening, you know who. Maybe you don't remember telling me. I remember being told that Rabbi Altein was saying that between him and Shalom Posner, they took the whole Shas. You understand? They're writing to the Rebbe that each of them is learning half of Shas that year. That's pretty good, right? That deserves a pat on the back. But the Rebbe's response is, I don't understand this list. Where are the other names? Where's the rest of the community? You're in a city. You're in Pittsburgh. Where are the other people who are taking part in this activity? So not only the Rebbe didn't mention to them, it's pretty cool that each of you are learning half of Shas this year, but the Rebbe was saying, like, what's going on here? Like, why are you keeping a good thing to yourselves? And the Rebbe says, if this is your lack of influence on the community in something that has to do with Nigla de Torah. Nigla de Torah meaning the legalistic part of Torah, not Chassidus, not Nister, not spiritual stuff, but the regular bread and butter, learning Gemara. The Rebbe says, where people don't have so much of a Yetzer Hara. People don't have so much of a resistance. You want to learn Gemara? Oh, sure, I'll learn Gemara. Like, they're not so threatened by Gemara. And you weren't able to get any non-Lubavitchers to join to do Chalukas Hashas? So the Rebbe says, I can only imagine your lack of influence when it comes to areas that have to do with Chassidus, which does threaten people because it does provoke the Yetzer Hara, and people come up with excuses. Oh, no, I don't want to learn Chassidus. So, in other words, the Rebbe is saying, this is a slam dunk. You should be able to get people to learn Gemara. What's wrong with Gemara? Gemara, that's basic Judaism. And you couldn't get anyone to do that? So I can only imagine your lack of influence in areas that people find questionable or new or they're uncomfortable with, like learning Chassidus. And then the Rebbe goes on and he explains something, just incredibly powerful imagery. Well, first the Rebbe says, you know that bringing Mashiach depends on Hafatzas HaMayanis, which is very interesting that the Rebbe includes Chalukas Hashas and Hafatzas HaMayanis. Very interesting. Learning a Yud Tes Kislev Masechta is part of Hafatzas HaMayanis, spreading out the wellsprings of the Baal Shem Tov. So we know the famous story of the Baal Shem Tov, Emosei Kasimar, when is the Master coming? Mashiach's soul in heaven tells the Baal Shem Tov, when Yisrael Baal Shem Tov's teachings become disseminated. Baal Shem Tov's Yortzeit's coming up, by the way. Shavuos. So the Rebbe says, you know that Mashiach's coming depends on this. That doesn't give you a sense of urgency? Like, this is your lack of influence? You couldn't get anybody to take a Yud Tes Kislev Masechta and Chalukas Hashas? And then the Rebbe says what I was going to tell you before, this really powerful imagery. The Rebbe says, picture the Alter Rebbe traveling across the world. The Alter Rebbe is touring the globe. And he passes through your town. He's talking to Rabbi Altein in Pittsburgh. He says the Alter Rebbe comes to your town, and he comes to your base medrash. Will the Alter Rebbe feel at home? Will he feel comfortable? Will he feel that he found his base medrash? Such a powerful image that the Rebbe is painting there. And the upshot of all of this is, and remember, this is 1949. This is before Yud Shvat. This is before the Rebbe receives officially leadership. In fact, later in the letter, the Rebbe even says, and who am I to point any of these problems out? You're right, who am I? I have no place telling anyone what to do, right? So this is officially the Rebbe working completely behind the scenes. But you see already the Rebbe's vision that there's something wrong with the idea of Anash, of Chabad chasidim, being insular and building and strengthening their own infrastructure without expansion and bringing new people into the fold. There's something wrong with that. Something off mission about that. And this isn't even talking about basic Judaism like tefillin and mezuzah and Shabbos candles like the Mivtzoyim, which later the Rebbe initiated. This is talking about things that are Hasidic practices like Chalukas HaShas or giving Maimud, Nifne money. These are specifically things that you associate with a Chassid, and the Rebbe is saying that the Alter Rebbe should be able to come to your town, whether it's Paris or it's Pittsburgh. And, they call Pittsburgh the Paris of Appalachia. So there's your Gzera Shava. And the Alter Rebbe should feel at home in your town because he should recognize that this is his base medrash, this is his shul. So you see here the kernel, the initial seed of a vision that became developed over the years. And maybe this helps clarify something that I think a lot of us ask or wonder about from time to time. Is our job, harbotzas haTorah and general basic Judaism and mitzvah observance, or is it hafatzas hamayonis, and specifically not just Chassidus, but Chassidus Chabad? And the answer is yes, it's both. It's both. Of course, it's both. Yeah, excuse me, sir, would you like to put on tefillin? Yeah, that's one of the Taryag mitzvahs. There's nothing specifically Chabad about putting on tefillin, right? That's every Yid has to put on tefillin. But then there's also something called connecting people to Chabad. Doesn't mean they have to become Lubavitchers. I don't think that's what it's saying here at all. In fact, it's pretty clear that that's not the point. The point is, even if they have a different identity and they follow different minhagim and they have their own community, they can still partake in some of these things that we perhaps selfishly consider to be our own inside tradition. The Rebbe is saying, no, this is for everybody, and I want to see everybody included. Okay. So, yeah, let's continue here. Umasbir zeh, and he explains this. The Rebbe is rehashing what Shlomo Chaim's letter said. So you said it's impossible to get anyone outside of our little tight-knit community to learn Chassidus except for our own tight community. No one will, to give Nifne. We cannot get anyone outside of our own little tight-knit community to give Nifne. And you explain it with many explanations, many reasons. Hine. I mentioned this in previous classes, how the Rebbe will use your own letter to answer you. This is famous. I mean, the Rebbe did this all the time. He would recycle back to you your own words. Sometimes to give you an answer, sometimes, like it's about to happen here, to point out a contradiction in your own logic. But look what the Rebbe says here. Hine shtei shuris v'chetzi lifnei zeh. You tell me, we can't get anyone to give nifna, only the chasidim. 2.5 lines before that, what did you just say? Kaisev, you wrote. Asher anash mekusharim b'chol libam v'chol nafsham ad mesiris nefesh b'peil mamish. Und as men soll ze heisen krichen and loch, velen ze krichen. You wrote to me that the chasidim here are totally devoted to the Rebbe to the point of absolute sacrifice. And if you would order them to crawl into a hole, they would crawl into a hole. So you just told me 2.5 lines earlier how devoted the chasidim are. They're ready to die. They're ready to give it all up. Pain and suffering, going through fire and water, and all of it. Okay. Didn't it occur to you that when I ask you to collect Maimad money for the Rebbe, that is far less dangerous or inconvenient than actual self-sacrifice? And yet that, you tell me, you can't do. You don't see the contradiction? So listen what the Rebbe says. Vehineni mamlitz olav, maimeres al kamaloi choli v'lei margish gavre damorit saye. It's a Gemara from Yuma, Chav Beis, Amid Beis. The Rebbe uses it a little bit differently, basically saying, I'm sort of sarcastically, I'm happy to know that you don't feel that this is a problem. It's nice for you that you don't sense the contradiction. Ki kenira she'ein etzlei af tzel dekasal gedaitoch. Efshe yesh me'ein stira bein ha'akdama v'hamaskana. It didn't even occur to you that there may be a contradiction between what you first said and what you said a couple lines later. You bring out that the chasidim are ready for Mesiras Nefesh, and then you say, oh, but by the way, we're not able to raise Maimad funds outside of the Hasidic community. You don't see how that's a contradiction? Now, this itself, I think, is something so important to understand. How the Rebbe, in many ways, redefined the notion of Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh is a Jewish concept. Particularly, it's a Hasidic concept, perhaps even more particularly in Chabad Chassidus. Mesiras Nefesh is spoken about at length as an expression of the Etzem HaNeshama, the deepest expression of the essence of the Jew, which comes out at times of adversity and clings to Hashem no matter what the price. It speaks about this at length in Chassidus. Koyach for Mesiras Nefesh. You look in Tanya, over here, chapters 18, 19, talks all about this. Actually, through all those green chapters right there. If you're watching on video, the podcast, you can't see this, but anyways. So the idea of Mesiras Nefesh is such a common idea in Chassidus, but the Rebbe sort of redefined it. You know, in the Rebbe's last Maimer, V'yata Titzave, the Rebbe speaks about this, how there were people who were living under communism and they were able to risk everything in order to cling to Yiddishkeit. And then when they come to America and they come to a free land, and all of a sudden they're able to do everything that they wanted to do before, and they can't be bothered. They can't be inconvenienced anymore to do it. And the Rebbe sort of bemoans the fact that we think of Mesiras Nefesh in terms of drama. They're going to come kill me if I don't bow to the idol. But Mesiras Nefesh can be quiet Mesiras Nefesh, everyday Mesiras Nefesh. It can just be your commitment to living a certain way, even when there's no threat. And that's also Mesiras Nefesh. That's also Mesiras Nefesh. So don't tell me I'm ready for Mesiras Nefesh, but only if it's in a spectacular, dramatic way. Sometimes Mesiras Nefesh is in quiet, everyday, mundane ways, living a committed life. That's Mesiras Nefesh. And in some ways, a bigger Mesiras Nefesh, because you're not going out in a blaze of glory, like some hero on a battlefield. It's quiet. It's contained. But that's also Mesiras Nefesh. You know, during the 6-Day War, a lot of Americans flew to Eretz Yisrael, which was crazy because before the miracle of the 6-Day War, they were digging graves, mass graves, to get ready for all the deaths that they predicted. So everyone wanted to get out of Israel, not go to Israel, but a lot of Americans, they flew to Israel. They wanted to support the war effort, whatever they could do. So a lot of young people went to Israel during that time. And then miraculously, there was this victory in 6 days. So Golda Meir, this was before she was prime minister. She was the foreign minister. She spoke to a group of these Americans. After the 6-day war, they all got on planes. They started flying home. She wanted them to make aliyah and to make their lives. And they were young people. She wanted them to make their lives in Israel. But all of a sudden, after they came to the war, now the war's over, and now they're flying home, going back to America. So she says, I don't understand. In time of war, you were ready to die with us. But in time of peace, you're not willing to live with us? There's something about human psychology that finds it easier to give up our lives than to live the rest of our lives committed to our values. Maybe it's the difference between something that's a one-off and something that you have to get up every single morning and recommit to. But this is the point. The Rebbe is saying, don't tell me that you're ready to be Meiser Nefesh. I'm asking you, go out and ask somebody who's not a Chabad Chassid to give Nifne and send it in. That's the Mesiras Nefesh. See, also you have to understand who the Rebbe is writing to. You're talking to people who were tortured, beaten, imprisoned. Many of them, perhaps most of them, of this group, had been tortured, beaten, imprisoned. Obviously, they hadn't been killed because they were all alive at the time, but they knew people who had been killed. It wasn't uncommon at all that they had friends and relatives who were murdered by the communists. So these were the people, the Frierdiker Rebbe's chasidim, okay? This is Dor Shishi, the 6th generation of Chabad. And it was all about being ready to die. Not just ready to die, they died. And that's what it was. That was Mesiras Nefesh. The Rebbe is saying to them that, and it's not Dor Shvi yet. We have to be careful here because this is Tafshin Tes. This is 5709. But it's very much a preview of the Rebbe's generation that Mesiras Nefesh now, instead of dying for a cause, it means living for the cause. And living for the cause means sharing it with others. In other words, once upon a time, Mesiras Nefesh meant getting killed for being an observant Jew. Today, Mesiras Nefesh means putting aside your self-consciousness and going up to a stranger on a Manhattan street corner and saying, "Excuse me, sir, are you Jewish?" That's Mesiras Nefesh in our day. So you see all of this sort of previewed in this letter that's written even before the Rebbe took leadership. Okay. The Rebbe continues. Ki al pi nesayin asher inu b'chol makeim asher yisasku benifne b'shanim achreinis. Experience has proven that any place where they actually try to collect nifne, where they actually make an earnest effort to do so, and the Rebbe mentions parenthetically, Artis Abris, America, Canada, Dreim America, South America, Dreim Africa, South Africa, V'chulu, and etc. Asu Pa'ula. They accomplished. Any place where they tried to do this, they were able to do it. Af shalei b'chol makim b'shava, granted, not with equal success in every place. Kemoven, understood. V'hamisaskim b'zeh loy huskaku lohaitzi metarmilom as hamesiras nefesh b'poil. And the people who were doing this didn't have to pull out of their backpack actual self-sacrifice. No one had to get killed doing this. V'afilo loy krichin and loch. And they didn't have to, did ever use Shlomo Chaim's expression again? Jumping in a hole. Nobody had to jump in any hole. Oh, we're ready to jump in a hole. Okay, that's very nice. No one's asking you to jump into a hole. All you have to do is approach somebody. Speak to them. The Rebbe is going to explain in the letter what it means, how to approach them, how to speak to them. Furthermore, these people saw, the ones who collected nifne, that not only did it not require them to sacrifice themselves, but to the contrary, they saw improvements in their own lives, materially and spiritually. And also, their reputation was improved in the eyes of those people that they collected the Maimed from. So you're telling me you're ready to be Meiser Nefesh. Okay, so be Meiser Nefesh, collect Maimed. But I want to tell you, the people who have already done this in America and Canada and South America and South Africa, and they were successful, you know what they found? It wasn't such a Mesiras Nefesh. It was actually win-win. They actually gained from it, spiritually and materially. And I want to tell you, the people that they collected from came to respect them even more. They didn't ruin their relationships with people by doing it. They actually came to be respected even more. V'seif, royim, and in the end, they saw sheheim makablim v'lei hanaisnim, that they were the ones who were getting and not giving. V'afilu begashmias uv'momain, even to the physical, material, monetary extent. So you're saying you're ready to give it all up? You want to know something? You're not going to have to give anything up. Just do this thing that I'm asking you to do, and you're going to only gain. You will only gain in every way, including even materially. Ella shibimid. I'm in the next paragraph. Ella shibimidinasam ata alpi hasbarase b'mechtave yesh mina muchen mesiras nefesh bepel mamish upshita shekela mesiras haratzin v'haseichel v'atam v'das. According to the explanations in your letter, in your country, meaning Paris, city in France, the chasidim are ready for real mesiras nefesh, which includes giving over their lives. So new? It's ... Like, so new? They had success doing this in other places where maybe the chasidim were not such bali mesiras nefesh like you guys. So new? Where's the nifna? V'zeis l'meidoi. This must be known. What I'm writing right now is not directed to any one individual. I mentioned that before we started the letter. He's saying to Shlomo Chaim, I'm not bashing you. I'm not saying anything individual to you. Ki mi ani lifsei kadaver shadavke pleni ben pleni olav mutal inyan pleni. Because who am I to say that a specific person has to do a specific thing? It's not my place. Remember, this is before the Rebbe is Rebbe. Udvorai mechovanim lekibutzam yachad. I'm talking about the group as a collective, as a community. Shebli safek sheyesh by kol hanitzrach lemilui tafkidam hoikari b'midinasam ato shehu hafatzas mayonas abal shamtev va'admor azokin va'anshe chutzeis tzorfas. And that your group surely has everything that you need. You have all the capabilities that you require to do your job, to do your mission, which is spreading the well springs of the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe to the Jewish community of France, the wider Jewish community of France. Ve'ein lonu mayin shederech bei nimshochim mayonas habal Shem Tov va'admor azokin ela echad. And we have but one wellspring through which we draw all of the wellsprings of the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, who, and that is Kved Kedushas Meiri V'chomi Admor Shlita, my revered father-in-law, the Rebbe, may he be well. It's very interesting. There's a Farbrengen after Yud Shvat, Toshin Yud Aleph, the Shabbos Vayetzi, Parshas Vayetzi Tes Kislev, which is the birthday and the Yortzeit of the Mittler Rebbe. And the Rebbe is speaking about the Mittler Rebbe and saying that today is a day where we have an opportunity to give a pidyon nefesh, a petition for prayer, to the Mittler Rebbe. And the Rebbe says, and it's understood that anyone who had an opportunity, any one of you who would be given the opportunity to give a to hand a to the Mitler Rebbe, that the Mitler Rebbe should pray for you, would jump at that opportunity. And the way that we do that is by learning his chassidus, and that's how we give upon. But then the Rebbe says something very interesting. And it's almost like, who was thinking this? Who was bothered by this? But the Rebbe preempted this and said, and in case you're going to say, well, why the Mitler Rebbe? Why not the Frierdiker Rebbe? The Rebbe says, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Frierdiker Rebbe. Because, and this is after Yud Shvat, this is after the passing of the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe is saying, to us, our connection to the Mitler Rebbe is through the Frierdiker Rebbe, and to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Alter Rebbe, and the Rebbe then actually goes through how all of the different Nesiim correspond to different spheroids. So the Baal Shem Tov is Atik, and the Magid is Arich, and the Alter Rebbe is Chochma, and Mitler Rebbe is Bina, Tzemach Tzedek is Das, and so on and so forth. And he says, but it's all combined in the Frierdiker Rebbe, and that's our way to connecting to all the Rebbeim. The Rebbe actually mentions there's something very interesting regarding his work in Kahos. You know, the Rebbe worked in the publishing arm of Lubavitch before he became Rebbe, even. That was one of his jobs he was appointed to by the Frierdiker Rebbe. So he says, when we started to design the Sharblat, the title page for the Hasidic Sforim that come out, the Sforim of the Rebbeim, there's a question of what expression we should use to title the series. Should it be Shalshelis Ha'or or Shalshelis Ha'ma'or? The chain of light or the chain of the luminary? And he said, we decided it's Shalshelis Ha'or, the chain of light, because the Ma'or, the luminary, is but one. There's no chain. Only that in each generation, that same luminary reappears in a way that fits the mission of that generation. So it's one Rebbe. And our way of connecting to that one Rebbe, which includes from the Baal Shem Tov all the way to the present, is through our Rebbe. So that's what the Rebbe is writing here. You're there to spread out the well springs of the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. And what does that mean? To connect people to the Rebbe. That also answers a question people ask a lot. You know, what does Hafatzas HaMayonos mean? Why isn't it enough? A person should appreciate the Baal Shem Tov. And the Rebbe is saying here, you want people to appreciate the Baal Shem Tov, you want to connect people to the Baal Shem Tov, we connect people to the Baal Shem Tov by connecting them to the Rebbe. And specifically, as the Rebbe is going to say here, by collecting nifne. As self-conscious as you may be about that, as awkward as that may feel, collecting money, asking people for money. But the Rebbe is going to talk about how important it is and how to do it properly. Okay, let's continue. Va'al yedei hiskashrus b'mayin zeh, hiskashrus haguf sheyochol likneis chay nafshei achayunis v'hanefesh. Okay, I gotta take this apart. Through connecting to this wellspring, meaning to the Frierdiker Rebbe, connecting ourselves bodily, and the Rebbe says there in parentheses a quote from Tanya, Perek Lamed Zayin of Tanya. Perek Lamed Zayin of Tanya, it speaks about the power of tzedakah. Why is tzedakah so powerful? Because, I was talking about it before, when I was introing this letter, about Maimon having that purity of not being seichel or midas. There's no intellect or emotion. It's just physicality, pure physicality. So in Tanya, Perek Lamed Zayin, it's explaining how powerful mitzvahs are, and especially the quintessential mitzvah, which is tzedakah. In the Yerushalmi, when it says ha mitzvah, without qualifying which mitzvah, it means tzedakah, because tzedakah is the mitzvah par excellence. It is the quintessential mitzvah. Why? Because the whole point of a mitzvah is physicality. And what's more physical than tzedakah? Where you take funds that you earned through your labor and funds that you could have used to procure your own physical needs, and then you take it and you turn it into a mitzvah. That's the ultimate transformation and elevation of the physical. So the Rebbe says, when you give maimud, when you give money, your hard-earned money that you could use to buy bread, and you turn that into Maimad money, you're connecting that physicality of yourself to the Rebbe. So that's called Hiskashus Haguf, and then also Hiskashus Hanefesh, Gam Maim. So when you do that, Gam Maim Chulu Naisa Maim Chayim, so then even waters which are not living waters become living waters. If there's like a stream that itself becomes supplied by a wellspring, then it becomes halachically considered part of the wellsprings for purposes of ritual purity. Kichein hu al pidin teira hasheletis umanheges esateva gor bepashtus un umatum. That's the halacha. Meaning, look at how water works. When you have a body of water that becomes supplied by a wellspring, then it itself halachically becomes part of the wellspring. So here's how you become united with the wellspring. You connect to the wellspring through the body and through the soul. We didn't talk about through the soul yet, but through the body is taking money that you could have used to procure your physical needs, and you're giving it away. You're giving it to the Rebbe, and you're turning that physicality into a deep connection to the Rebbe. It's a very powerful concept here. The Rebbe doesn't say this here, but it's somewhat implied. The quote from Tanya Perek Lamed Zayin, Sheyochel liknes chay nafshe achayunis, is talking about how the giver could have used the funds for his own physical needs. There's another aspect here, which is sort of implied, but that is that when you give that money as maimud or nifna to the Rebbe, you're giving it to the Rebbe in a form which the Rebbe can then use to procure his physical needs. Now, what are the physical needs of a Rebbe? It's a whole different ballpark. But a Rebbe has physical needs, and when funds were given to Maimad, it was generally understood that the Rebbe would use these funds. I'm talking about back to the times of the Alter Rebbe, that Maimad included the upkeep of the Rebbe's home, his family, his home, but also not just his private home, his shul, and its physical auspices, the actual building. And there's a physicality on both ends, both from the giver and the recipient. I'll tell you a wild story, actually, that I don't think is very well known. And that is that there was a chassid, Reb Moshe Pinchas Katz, and one of his things that he did was collect Maimad. And he collected Maimad in the times of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And after Yud Shvat, after the Frierdiker Rebbe's passing, the Rebbe wanted that it should continue, that they should continue collecting Maimad specifically for the Frierdiker Rebbe. And I'm not going to get into a whole background of this, but a few years after Yud Shvat, Moshe Pinchas Katz, I don't know if he said it or he merely implied to the Rebbe that he wasn't that passionate about the work, because he felt that when it was in the Rebbe's lifetime, meaning the Frierdiker Rebbe's lifetime, that was one thing. But now it was after the Frierdiker Rebbe's passing, and he wasn't that passionate about that cause. He wanted to maybe give the funds for something else. And now, in actuality, where the funds being used, the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimad that the Rebbe continued to collect after Yud Shvat was basically going to the Frierdiker Rebbe's Rebbitzin to upkeep her quarters, her living quarters in 770, and as upkeep for her. So Moshe Pinchas Katz intimated that he wasn't that drawn to this work anymore. And the Rebbe said something absolutely staggering, if you understand the halachas involved here. The Rebbe sensed Moshe Pinchas Katz's lack of enthusiasm for the project and said, "Was art dir, a reis helfen dem schwer, ois halten te neuak suba." What does it hurt you to help my father-in-law to maintain the conditions of his marital contract. Now, if you know anything about a ksuba, we learn Rambam, so if you do Gimel Prakim, you learn about this at least once a year. In Hilchas Ishus, in Perik Yud Beis, it talks about it also later in Perik Yud Ches about Tanoya Ksuba. But the first place is in Yud Beis, Tanoya Ksuba. And Tanoya Ksuba, the conditions of the marital contract, basically is talking about an obligation that a husband has during his lifetime to support his wife, to give her livelihood. After he passes, there's an estate, and she benefits from the estate. And if he has a house, she lives in the house, and she gets sustenance from the estate. But there's no concept of a person who's no longer living to have any type of financial responsibilities anymore to go and earn money, to collect it, to have it sent to him. You understand? After someone passes, there's an estate. The wife is sustained from that. But there's no obligation on a person who's passed away that he has to go out and make a living. It'd be the height of irony that a person who's no longer living should have to go out and make a living. So the fact that the Rebbe said, the Rebbe surely knew the halachas and what a ksuba meant, that giving maimud to the Frierdiker Rebbe after Yud Shvat was helping the Frierdiker Rebbe to uphold his obligation according to his marital contract, to Noya Ksuba, is basically something you would say about a living person. And it's a very strong statement because, the Rebbe would say, when it comes to halacha, we observe the halachas that there was a histalkus and we have to say Kaddish. But when it comes to hergish, a person's feeling, their personal feeling, okay, so they can feel connected, the Rebbe is still with us. But the Rebbe would distinguish between those two things. But here you see where the Rebbe is making a statement that has halachic implications, and in the realm of halacha, making a statement about the Frierdiker Rebbe in a manner that it mandates us to view the Frierdiker Rebbe as a living person. Just very interesting story. I don't think very well known, and hopefully it'll become well known. And also, I should just mention, since now the letter is going to take us 3 hours to learn, that the same thing can be applied today about giving maimud to the Rebbe after Gimel Tammuz. First of all, I think people are ignorant. They don't know about it. They don't know about it. I think there are plenty of chasidim who know about learning Rambam and learning Chitas and going on Mivtzoyim and Chalukas Hashas that we mentioned before. They don't know that part of his kashrus is giving maimud. So I think a lot of it is just ignorance. And some of it may also be cynicism. The people say, well, when the Rebbe was alive, I would give money, but now... Okay, let me just address that. First of all, what do you think the Rebbe was buying? Before Gimel Tammuz, what was the Rebbe buying with his money? You think it was personal enrichment? Chas v'sholom. Most of what the Rebbe spent personal, actually the proper term to use here is discretionary funds. Most of what the Rebbe used discretionary funds for was communal projects. But if you want to talk about personal expenditures, okay, so there was the upkeep of the Rebbe's home. That continues today. Who do you think pays for the Rebbe's home? There's a home on President Street. It's there. It has to be maintained. Where are the funds for that? That's Maimud. The Rebbe's shul, that's how Maimud was spent before Gimel Tammuz. The Rebbe's shul. Okay, well, last year when the bricks broke in front of 770 and they were fixed magically, somebody just showed up and fixed them. Who paid for that? Maimud. Okay, the Rebbe's library. The Rebbe's library. Who keeps up the library? There's a building there. There's a staff. There are people, scholars have to get paid. Who pays for that? Maimud. Now, what's Maimud? There's no bank account called Maimud. There never was a bank account called Maimud. When the Rebbe would receive checks from Maimud, the Rebbe would endorse them over to Machne Yisrael. And that's what continues till today. There's a fund within Machne Yisrael. You can go on the Machne Yisrael website and you check off. There's many different funds that they maintain. But you can select that you're giving to Maimud, specifically that this is for Maimud. And you're designating those funds for those projects. So whatever was done before Gimel Tammuz is done today. And if you want to be super cynical and say, well, if I could hand it right to the Rebbe, I would do it. But I don't know who's handling it now. You want to know something? If you want to be super cynical, the same person that the Rebbe handed it to, Baruch Hashem, is still handling those funds. So there's really no reason to say that there would be any difference as far as giving Maimud today and before Gimel Tammuz. And I really just think it's something that people don't know enough about. And it's Hashem, from this class and maybe from other things, we'll get the word out and people will appreciate what an important part of his kashrus that really is. Anyways, yeah, okay, let's continue here. Yeah. Uchvei terase ba b'michtave ukenira meheder hapu'ulais zehu gamkein hachlotes anash shebemachne und ganz kaltblutig geyser schneit up shlachol achenu b'nei Yisrael shebemachne melvad elu hadorim b'shchuna shalai ein shayches lechol zeh. So you come along in your letter. We just said that giving Maimud is something that connects you to the Rebbe physically, in a very special way, in a unique way. Why wouldn't you want someone to have that benefit? And then you come along, and the Rebbe says in Yiddish, cold-bloodedly, your geyser has a double meaning in Lashon Kodesh. It can mean to decree, but it can also mean to cut off, and that's what the Rebbe says there in Yiddish, schneit up, you cut off. You come along, and you cut off these people, and you say, oh, I'm sorry, they're not going to be interested. They wouldn't be interested. No. Maimud will come from the chasidim, from this little community, but I'm sorry, it just won't fly. It won't play in Peoria, like the marketing people say. Sorry, can't talk about this to normal people. So the Rebbe continues. Yikru no la'asifas kol anash v'yaser cheshbon tzedek. Kama yagias yagu lirchosh nefashis lezeh. Gather together the chasidim and make an accounting. How much effort was actually put toward this? V'oz l'maisa yeh kol shakla v'tarya ki tekev miyad yisbardu asibas leheder teitzais. You're not going to have to debate very long, and you're going to immediately realize the reason that nothing has been accomplished is because no effort was put in. That's what the Rebbe is saying here. You're telling me we can't get anyone beyond the Chassidic Brotherhood to give nifneh, and I'm telling you it's because you haven't even tried. And why wouldn't you try if you understood how important this is? This should be something that you should be putting forth effort, especially when you claim to possess such willingness for self-sacrifice. Now, here's a wonderful part of this letter. Beautiful, like, vignette or little slice of life here. And I actually, in a nosy kind of way, the nudnik that I am, I tried to find out who this is. And I have some clues, but I don't know, so I'm not going to say. But if anyone knows, oh, how I would love to hear who this is referring to. Okay. Avrech echod. There was a young man. Who had to flee his place. You know, in that era, a lot of people had to flee, whether because of the Holocaust or because of communism. Not sure which one it is. He had to flee his place. He wasn't the guy who knew how to daven. Avedas HaTfilah means the Chassidish davening, like meditative davening. He didn't know how to do that, no. He wasn't a maskil, and he wasn't an ovid. Take us another hour to explain what's a maskil and an ovid. The point is, he wasn't a big chassid. He didn't even have a beard. And in fact, he never learned in Temchet Tamimim. Remember that I was speaking to people who all studied in Temchet Tamimim, maybe even the real, original Temchet Tamimim in Lubavitch. This guy I'm talking about now, he didn't learn in Timchei Tamim. And in fact, he didn't learn in yeshiva at all. No. Nodod lemedina recheika. He ended up wandering to a faraway place. Recheika beyeser. Hein b'makom, hein b'inyan yadis. Geographically distant and also Jewishly very remote. V'kavur eze zman hischilu lagia ma'anoshim v'noshim misham michtovim l'chvei kedushas meir v'chomi ad mor shlita. After a while, we started getting, remember, the Rebbe is the secretary of the Previous Rebbe. He works in 770. He says, after a while, we started noticing an influx of letters coming from that place where this guy that I'm talking about was living. And these were not Chabad names. These were not familiar names. All of a sudden, we're getting letters from all types of Jews. Uladugma. For example, Meisha Bailis Asik. There was a woman who owned a store, a business. Shmetziam law, lisker chanus v'dira bechelik echad shel ha'ir or bechelik acher. And she needed to decide whether she should rent a storefront in one part of the city or in another part of the city. V'she'elis hechlik kvei kedushas admor shlita matase. So she wrote in to the Previous Rebbe asking what she should do. Now the Rebbe says here, Ma'elam lei rasa esai. This woman who wrote the letter never saw the Previous Rebbe. V'yedas shema'elam lei haya kved kedishas meida v'chami admor shlita lei rak be'ira alagam b'chol medinasa. And she knows that the Previous Rebbe never visited her city or her entire country. He was never there. She knows that. Eina ma'anash, she's not from the Hasidic community. U'kinira gamloi megeja anash, she's not even from Hasidic lineage, meaning not even culturally Hasidic. Aval kisheshama maha avrich dvarim hayetzim enalei, but when she heard from this young man, his heartfelt words, remember this young man who never learned in yeshiva and didn't even have a beard, but he spoke from the heart to this woman. He spoke to a lot of people. One of the people he spoke to was this lady, the shopkeeper. When he spoke and she heard his heartfelt words, Yesh Rebbe b'Yisrael, that there's a Rebbe among the Jews. Ve'ein hu nichnas b'agbolos hatava, and he is not limited with the normal limitations of nature. V'areitze leleches levatach darkei, and anyone who wants to be sure in their path, b'mischar, in business, b'anhogas habayis, in family life, v'chulu, or whatever. Lo yodem es yodim ebli lishel sp harabi. You don't lift your hand. You don't make a move before you ask the Rebbe. V'hakira b'ha avrech shepiv li beishav. And she saw that this young man was sincere when he described this. Ki nikorin divrei emes, because the truth is recognizable. Tzivsa lichtev hashe'elo hanal. So she told him to write this letter for her. And what happens? Shayches mimele lenifne. She automatically becomes someone who will give nifne. In other words, the Rebbe is now explaining. You're going to walk up to a stranger and say, give money to the Previous Rebbe. I don't know who that is. I don't know why I'm supposed to give money. But the Rebbe says, it's a process. It's a process. This guy, who's not like you, he didn't learn in Timchei Tamim. He doesn't have that background. But he's very sincere, and he tells people, you got to write to the Rebbe. And they believe him. And then they write to the Rebbe. And then when he says, and now send some money to the Rebbe, it's sort of like a logical thing for them to do. It's very natural for them. So you're saying, oh, it's too out of left field for people. Well, yeah, it's out of left field if you don't cultivate. But this guy, he would cultivate. Not as a strategy, but because that's just how he sincerely felt. That's how he lived. So that's how he spoke. And people heard it and they were moved by it. So this lady automatically, now she's giving nifna. A lady like this is giving nifna. And then what happens? This is powerful. Umiskareves liyadus. It brings her close to Yiddishkeit. See, that's such a powerful thing. That writing to the Rebbe about a question about a store and sending nifna money is her first step to Yiddishkeit. This is a process that will lead her down a path. Ubetach bekerev hayamim yu alichais besa bekashres v'taras hamishpacha v'chulu. It is a certainty now that it is a matter of time. Eventually, her family will be will be conducted in a way of kashrus. They're going to eat kosher food, and taras hamishpacha. They're going to have mikveh in their marriage. All that's going to come about. It's going to happen because now she got connected, and the process has been initiated, and this is what's going to happen. Yeah. These is this little story here. It's just one example. These are the fruits of one simple, he calls him an avrich pashet, one simple young man. Again, without all the advantages of you guys, that I was speaking to these guys. You guys are from the real Chabad backgrounds, and you have all that Chabad upbringing with the Chabad Mesiras Nefesh, and you're ready to die for the Rebbe. Beautiful. I want to tell you something. He's a simple guy, never learned Temichet Temimim, doesn't know how to daven, he's not a Noivid, he's not a maskell, he doesn't have a beard, but he has a very sincere feeling about the Rebbe, and people recognize this when he speaks, and he gets people to write to the Rebbe and to send Maimon money to the Rebbe, and those people get started on a path that will eventually bring them to Jewish observance. So this is what one person can accomplish. Since you're making excuses that it can't be done, I'm telling you, case in point, it can be done. Yeah. So this is what one guy did. And he does it without self-sacrifice. Guys, you don't need to do it with self-sacrifice or accepting of the yoke. You know why? Because for him, this isn't something that he has to go against his brain to do. It's not even against, there's their godly understanding and there's your human understanding. He says, the Rebbe here says, this guy, when he does this, it's not Mesiras Nefesh for him because it just makes sense to him. This is a logical thing that you would tell people you meet about the Rebbe. Poshet etzlai, turn the page to page 8. Al Yisaid Masharab Amuchash Sharebi Amirase Amira Birchase Bracha V'gam Nefesh Bahamis Maskemes Alzeh. This guy, when he spoke to people about the Rebbe, he did it with such a pshitus, it was such a natural thing to do because it's based on what he saw, that the Rebbe's word is a word, the Rebbe's blessing is a blessing, and that even his animal soul agrees to this. So it didn't require great Mesiras Nefesh. He did not come to this through deep analysis of mystical texts. So that I was saying about these chasidim. You guys, you learn chassidus, and you daven, and you think, and beautiful. I want to tell you something. It doesn't take all that. It just takes simply looking at reality, looking at the track record of the Rebbe, and coming to a very simple conclusion, which this simple young man was able to do, and he's not capable of all that deep analysis. So clearly it's not about the deep analysis, and to the contrary, maybe your deep analysis is getting in the way. Rather, experience has shown. His experience and the experience of people he knows. And here the Rebbe says in Yiddish, as mahot gefolgt is given gut. That if you listen to the Rebbe, it's good. Was mahot nit gefolgt, hat man gehat a psak. And if you didn't follow, you didn't obey, wasn't so good. Ubemei lekemei she'enei boish loimer lechol miuda'ov has kukim lezeh. So he was not embarrassed to speak to anyone about this. I'm sorry. Just like you wouldn't be embarrassed to commit, just like you would not be embarrassed to tell somebody the address of an expert doctor, a specialist. Somebody needs a specialist. You wouldn't be embarrassed to say, oh, I think I know a guy. Kach kisheroya ish nimtza b'mevucha yemid lifnei pisrein shailas chayim mikaris. You see a person who's facing a dilemma or he has a serious question in life. So you're going to tell him. Just like you wouldn't be embarrassed to tell him the name of a doctor if he needed one. The Jewish people were not abandoned. We have somebody to ask. Furthermore, not only would you not be embarrassed to go tell the guy about the Rebbe if you saw that he needed something that the Rebbe can do for him, but you wouldn't wait for him to tell you. Oh, do you know a guy? Oh, I happen to know a guy. No, you wouldn't wait. Because probably this guy doesn't even know what a Rebbe is. So what are you going to wait for him? He's going to come to you and say, listen, I heard about, sometimes it happens, I heard about a thing about writing to the Rebbe. Oh yeah, take. You don't wait for that because he hasn't even heard of the concept. You go to him, you explain to him, you don't have to rely on your own estimation, on your own evaluation. You don't have to rely on the shadchan. You don't have to rely on the doctor. So you don't have to rely on the broker making the deal. All of those things are doubtful. You have one way to remove all doubt. Our sages assure us that if you say something with sincerity, it'll be accepted that way. So don't wait until the person comes to you and asks you if this is a real thing. Go to him. Everyone's got issues. Everyone's got things they need clarity about. And tell him about this concept. Now, the Rebbe is going to train us how to do this. The Rebbe is going to give us actual steps how to speak to people to warm them up to this idea. All right, let's continue. Va'ata b'nidain michtav kvei terase. Let's get back to the point of your letter. B'machne yesh misalta u'mishamna shalanash. In your group are the best and the brightest, the all-stars. And truly, these are people who were heroes, real heroes. I don't say that term lightly. Heroes of Judaism in communist Russia. So the Rebbe says, you guys are the best and the brightest. Shero es admor nishmase Eden. You guys saw the Rebbe Rashab. Ulahavdo ben Chaim lechaya Chaim es kvei kedushes meir v'chami admor shlita. And you guys saw my father-in-law, the Rebbe. Nivchnu bichur ha'eni v'nisyenis mikol haminim. You were tested with all types of tests. These guys went through hell, literally. They went through the hell of Stalinist oppression. They went through the hell of the Holocaust. They went through the hell of the war and of being displaced and of being refugees. These people went through so much. And you guys, you worked on yourselves and you learned the Hasidic texts and you applied the Hasidic texts and you refined yourself and you're so spiritual. You've got it all. Nimtzu betchila bekemp. Now, what's this camp? This camp. This is a DP camp, a displaced persons camp. And specifically, when the Rebbe is referring to the camp, he means Poking Pine City, which it's an American name, but it was in Germany. After the Holocaust, obviously, there were a huge number of Jews who had no home to go back to. And many of them had no families to go back to. They were the only survivors from their families. So there were displaced persons camps, DP camps, that were set up in Germany after Germany was conquered. And there were areas that were under the administration of the different allies. So there was one area that was under the administration of the United States. They say that I don't know if this is true or not, but that the DP camps that were in the U.S. administrated areas of Germany, you could actually get easier a U.S. visa, and that was what was attractive about it. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's what I heard. So there was a DP camp that was actually set up at an old U.S. Army base, and it was the second largest of the DP camps. And at its height, I think there were over 7,000 Jews living there. And in fact, Rebbetzin Chana, the Rebbe's mother, lived in that DP camp. And many Lubavitcher families lived in that DP camp. And I could get into a whole story about how the Lubavitchers came out of Russia with fake Polish passports and the whole train from Lvov and going across the border after World War II. We're not going to get into that. But they ended up in Poking Pine City, DP camp in Germany. It's like 2 hours from Munich. It's like in southern Germany. I think it's near Austria. It is near Austria. So the Rebbe, and Shlomo Chaim was one of them who was in this DP camp. And so were, I don't know if all of the people in Paris, the Lubavitchers in Paris, had been in this DP camp, but a lot of them had. They had shared that experience. So the Rebbe now, at this point in the letter, is referring to their activities when they were in the DP camp. Yeah. So, nimtzu betchila bekemp, bein alofim ma'achenu b'nei Yisrael shahayu tzmeim l'dibur cham v'chai. In the camp, there were thousands of Jews who were thirsting for a warm, vibrant word. These were people whose lives were turned upside down, and they were looking for meaning. It's wild when you think about it, but the Rebbe is saying to them, you had a prime opportunity. These people, these Jews, from all places in Europe, from all backgrounds, from all levels of observance, it doesn't matter. They had one thing in common. Their lives had been turned upside down, and they were looking for meaning. And if you guys would have set up shop in the DP camp, you would have been able to connect all of these people. Why didn't that happen? Why was this incredible opportunity completely mishandled? It's wild if you think about it, because you're talking to the people. These chasidim were in the DP camp. They were also in the DP camp. Their lives had also been turned upside down. But the Rebbe is saying to them that when you were in the DP camp, you had an opportunity. Let's continue. They were looking for something. Lemila shel hisaydus v'kiruv. They were looking for a word that would inspire them and bring them close. Vatzi'irim shebehem shoafu be'ikar lahira. The young people especially were looking for guidance. They were rudderless. They were looking for someone to just make meaning for them. Ayehu Moshe zeho isha sheyaleinu mehamitzarim v'hagvulim v'yadeinu derech hachayim. Where is Moshe? This parallels what the Jews were saying when Moshe delayed coming down from the mountain. But where is Moshe, who took us out of, not Mitzrayim, but Mitzarim, out of the constrictions and the narrow places, and is going to show us a path in life? These people had all experienced absolute heartbreak, and they were craving some sense, some type of meaning, some way to put the pieces back together. Why didn't you heed that call? Vashaila, here's the question. Kama nefashos niteisvu ayedei hishtadlusam v'yegias nafsham al teiras habal shem tev admor azaken b'meshech kol zman sheyeh bekemps. How many chasidim did you pick up in the DP camps? How many people did you bring to Teres Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe? It's interesting. I was thinking about it. I don't know if I've heard of any Chabad families that come from the camps. And I was thinking about, well, it wasn't really such a great time for the people who were in the camps. I mean, talking about the Lubavitchers. I was thinking about this, that, when the Previous Rebbe left Russia, it wasn't exactly on pleasant terms. I mean, you do know that when the Previous Rebbe left Russia, Stalinist Russia, it was because, I know we don't say this because the Rebbe doesn't use these words, but I just want to make sure everyone understands that there was a death sentence. You do understand that. And he had to leave Russia because it was not a safe place. And he was also a refugee of sorts. But, it's interesting, wherever the Previous Rebbe went, whether it was Riga or Advatsk, there were peiros, there were chasidim were made, and there were people who were drawn close. And even if they didn't become Lubavitchers, okay, but they tasted from chassidus, they developed a warmth and an appreciation for chassidus in every one of these places. So that's what the Rebbe is saying. It's like, yeah, it's not necessarily always under the most pleasant conditions that you arrive in a place. Maybe you arrive there as a war refugee. But if you're in a place, look around. There are people who are thirsting. Reach out to them. So the Rebbe is complaining here. There were no, I'd never heard of the people who were brought close while you guys were in the camps. Now the Rebbe goes on. Ksavti oz lekemp de anash hayeser gadol shiyasu bechol hanimtsoyim bekemp befrat bahanoyer maimed ruchni. I spoke at that time, or I wrote at the time, to the chasidim in one of the big camps, or the largest group of chasidim in the camp, and I told them they should work with the youth. The Rebbe says something interesting here in parentheses. Kisharti she'ein nechitzus be'achiza begashmis betchilas hakibush. I told them to work with them first spiritually, because I didn't see there was anything physically really that could be done. Meaning, like, the material situation was so absolutely abysmal. So there was nothing really physically that could be done, but you could give them spirituality. That you have. Vanuni. So I was answered at that time. Shebavadi tayvadavar. There's certainly a good idea. Aval mitchila tzarich lahavtiach taktsiv leitzois. But first we have to get a budget for this. Bechlal nochin lahascha bezek shiavoyu. Turn the page. Kolanash elamanucha. Rather, what they told me is, here's what we'll do. Let's get the chasidim out of the DP camps and get them settled in permanent residences. And then, after they're settled in permanent residences, yisu mehem kechol hanitzroch chazar el hakemp. They'll travel back, they'll commute back to the DP camps where they used to live. V'yavdu sham b'mesiras nefesh. And there they will engage in the work with great self-sacrifice. So the Rebbe says, I told them, get to work being Makar people in the camps. I was told, great idea, but we need a budget first. And really what we need to do, first let's get the chasidim settled, and then afterwards they'll commute back to the DP camp and they'll work with people. Yeah. So the Rebbe says, now, I mentioned it a second time, not in writing, but through somebody who visited there. I'm not sure who the Rebbe is referring to, who the Rebbe sent to give over this message. But I sent somebody who's going to visit the camp. I sent him with this message, let's get to work. So, Bachru Kimedumali Bivad. What happened? What were the results? They elected a committee. Uvezeh nistayim adavar. And that was the end of it. And the results are known, meaning garnished, nothing. That's always the death of any project. You elect a committee, and then you are confident nothing else is going to happen after that. Yeah. Ja, okay. Haben sich Anash abgemattet. Und Kenira Asher gam mit sei hat man sich abgemattet. Und gesehen, als es ist Rachmonas Afiden. Anash are tired. Yeah, they've gone through a lot. Yeah. And it's Rachmonas, like it is a pitiful situation. No doubt about it. Men mattet sich und ohne Tolk, but all of this is coming to no avail. V'avium li'ir nesheves. You're here now in a settled place in Paris. V'kulei hai v'ulai. Maybe now you're going to get started with the work. V'hinei es chazet sich iber der ganze Seder. The whole pattern is just repeating itself. Yeser nochen hefech haseder, or more aptly stated, the lack of pattern, the lack of order, meaning chaos. I told you back in the camps to get to work. You told me you couldn't do it in the camps, or you gave excuses how you would implement it later. And now it's later. Now you're in Paris. Now you're settled. Where are the activities? Nothing's happening. Ze yesem shonosh nimtsoyim b'machanom ato uma hu asa hakel mahapulais kayomes b'Paris uvisvivaiseho. It's over a year that you're in Paris. What is the bottom line, sum total of your activities, of your work, of outreach in Paris? B'yesi b'Paris shon v'chetzi. A year and a half ago, I was in Paris. Remember, this letter is from 1949. The Rebbe went and visited Paris in 1947, the spring, early summer of 47, to bring back his mother, Rebbe Tzimchana. And they arrived back in America on Chof Chasidim. Second time the Rebbe arrived in America, also on Chof Chasidim. Both times the Rebbe came to America was Chof Chasidim, 41 and 47. Very interesting. So I was in Paris a year and a half ago. Dibarti kama pamim. And I spoke many times. Acher safe hechlitu kenira mipnei hakoved. Shavad nifne yisasik gamba anshe. They humored me. The Rebbe says they did it out of respect for me. They appointed a committee of nifne for the city. And they got people who are supposedly able to deal with outsiders. Mizman lizman nish chakira v'drisha mehanaisa b'zeh v'neidaiti. From time to time, I would inquire what's going on. What's up with the Nifne committee. And I would find out, she'ein oisim uma, nothing's going on. Loi be'inyan maimed ruchni, v'loi be'inyan maimed gashmi. Not spiritual maimed, and not material maimed. Interesting concept. So, mostly this letter is talking about literal physical maimed, money, funds that are sent. But there's also a concept of spiritual maimed. And that would be the spiritual connection, learning chassidus and doing things, following the ways of the Rebbe, more of the customs. That's the spiritual half of it. But there's also the physical half. So I didn't hear that anyone in Paris is getting involved in either of those two halves. And it's interesting what the Rebbe says here, this next part of the sentence. Shnei achatzoyim, these two halves, Shemlavad beheroi shah tzrichim liyos beyachad v'hilchim miskaimim rak beyachad. Except in very unusual circumstances or rare circumstances, really the two have to go together. The two have to go together. So I didn't hear any of this. Gam ani hoisi sameach im seif hoya mishahu mediani. I would be very happy if ultimately someone would come along and set me straight and inform me. Shekame miprote puleseyem iyiduimli. That no. They were doing a lot of this work. You just didn't know about it. I would be very happy to find out that I just didn't know about it. Oh, I didn't know. Very happy to find out. I'd be very happy to find out. Vasirius anoshim loirak nispalu mehem v'nosnu nidveis momin ala meistes. And that not only did they affect many people, but they gave money to the organizations. Ela shagam kiblu mehem teiras hadach. And that they were even learning chassidus, v'nasa chasidim, and they were becoming chasidim. Or even if they didn't become chassidus, chassidim, they had some type of a feeling of connection to the Rebbe. V'hinei, Raya ani b'michtave shemuchrav kol miktzei aveda zatzlam. But I can see from your letter that this entire type of work is out of the question. It's just not on your radar, the Rebbe says. Pshita asher shmira satzir von de eigene daladames der reshes aveda rabba v'yagia temidus. Very interesting concept here. Obviously, it's important to guard your own image. I don't think that Rebbe is saying that in the most superficial sense of like trying to fool people, trying to look a certain part. I think what the Rebbe is saying is there is such a concept of a community making certain prioritization of maintaining its own infrastructure. But even in the Beis Hamikdash, guarding the Beis Hamikdash was only one of the forms of service. Not all of the Kehanim did it. Very interesting. Every summer we learn Hilchos Beis Bechira. This summer we'll take a tour in the real Beis Hamikdash Shlishi. But every year, the Rebbe was very into during the 3 weeks to learn the Hilchos Beis Bechira from the Rambam, from Mishnah Torah, Sefer Aveda. So over there in Perek Ches, it talks about Shmira, the mitzvah to guard the Beis Hamikdash. So it's interesting what the Rebbe is saying here, that there's maintaining your community, looking after your own, and that's kind of what the Rebbe calls Shmiras Hamikdash. But then there's all the other avodas, all the other forms of service, and that's what the Rebbe is referring to as outreach. It's kind of interesting imagery there, that especially you're talking about 1949, after the Holocaust, after the war, and so many Jewish communities were absolutely reeling, and a lot of the prioritization was placed on rebuilding their own infrastructure, not outreach. How can I go deal with other people? I'm trying to rebuild my life, and if I can manage to do that, maybe rebuild my community, my little Dalet Ames. And the Rebbe is calling that that's important. That's like Shmiras HaMikdash, but that's only one of the avodas. You can't just have Kehanim who guard the Beis HaMikdash, Mashpiyim who work with people who are already anash. You have to also have people who are going out and finding new blood and reaching out to the Jewish community as a whole. Even when you're reeling from your devastating circumstances of life, it's not an excuse. Because you know what? The people you need to be reaching out to are also reeling from their devastating circumstances of life. Yeah, everyone's still with me? This is the real Tikkun Leil Shavuos. We're going to stay up all night. 2 nights. Okay. Let's keep going. Pshita she'im yifkeshu ish v'yemru. Oh, remember I said earlier that I was going to teach us how to do it, how to cultivate. Pshita she'im yifkeshu ish v'yemru loy yid devai groshi. Obviously, if you walk up to someone on the street and say, Jew, give money, it's a joke. I mean, it's like the Russian bandits, the muggers would say, Žid, davai groshi, Jew, give money. So if you're going to walk up to somebody like a stick-up man, like a mugging, yeah, obviously it's not going to be too successful. You're going to walk up to somebody and say, give me money. Ve'et name lepleni ben pleni animtza bemercha kama alafim parsais, and give that money to someone you never heard of who lives across the ocean. She'enata yedea oisa, you don't know him. Ve'ein loi shaychs imcha, you don't have any connection to him that you know of. Ela shehu, but you know why you should do it? Because he is a bal mailes gavayes v'nisa'es. He's a person of sterling character. You're going to go and approach people like that. You be'einav k'misatim. You're going to sound like a scam artist. You can't do that. Obviously, you can't walk up to people cold and say, give money to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Who's the Lubavitcher Rebbe? I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know why you're asking me to send him money. This is totally inappropriate. Right, okay. So that's not how to approach people. That's not how to do it. But on the other hand, pshita, it's obvious. Asher ish hamaymin be'emunah shlema, hainu hamanheges es kol ha'keiches shela. That if you believe deeply, and deeply in a way where your faith is totally integrated into all of your soul powers, you're completely holistic in this faith. It's not compartmentalized. It guides you in all of your thinking and your feeling and your behavior. If that faith has completely permeated you, Shidas ubirkas pleni ben pleni bakel mashallah v'yedea b'chavere shetzarech lahachlit be'inyin kari debani chaim ezeinu v'chulu. You know that the blessing of a certain holy man holds power. And you know that this particular guy, this acquaintance of yours, needs some type of blessing in some area of life, whether it's in family matters or health or in money. Or perhaps the person is in a dangerous situation. Humanity dictates, and the love of your fellow Jew dictates, and a sense of saving a life dictates. If you have even a slight doubt that maybe he might listen to you, you are obligated to chase him down, and tell him, Rachem al atzmecha. Have pity on yourself. Val b'nei beischa, and on your family. Val kol asher lecha, and on everyone who matters to you. Val binoscha al tishoin. Do not rely on your own understanding. That's a turn of phrase from Shlomo Melech, from Mishlei. Lamei dach. Learn chassidus. Hiskasha bepleni ben pleni. Connect yourself to the Rebbe. Asay al pi devorav. Do what he says. Va'oz tatzliach, and then you will succeed. If you go like that, with sincerity, v'yadua, havtochas admor hazokin, it's known, we have a promise from the Alter Rebbe. As was chasidim velen ton, velen ze matzliach sein. What chasidim will do, if they'll make an effort, they're going to be successful. So obviously, you can't go up to people in a wild way. But if it's a sincere thing, if you believe that there's something to this relationship, then it's the most natural thing that you would speak about this to others. In fact, it would be cruel not to speak about it with them. I'm not pretending, by the way, this is easy. I'm not pretending that I don't personally need to hear this letter. I've been in places speaking to crowds where I didn't have to mention to people that if you want to meet me at the aisle, you should email me. And if you give me 24-hour notice, and if I'm in town, I'll meet you at the aisle. I didn't have to mention that. And in some ways, it is a little bit, I am a little self-conscious. Maybe they'll hear that and it'll just be too much. It's too intense. And then they won't want to listen to the rest of my message. I understand the concern completely. But then I ask myself, is this something that I'm taking on faith? Like, is it a chayk? Is it like para aduma? That it feels awkward to tell someone else about it? Or is this something that even my Nefesh Abamis knows is true? And if even my Nefesh Abamis knows it's true, it's weird not to talk about it. Why? It's weird not to talk about it. Why wouldn't you let people know this address? If you knew the address of a specialist, of a doctor, of an expert doctor, and somebody needed that doctor, you wouldn't tell them the address? Why wouldn't you tell them? Okay, let's continue the letter. We're on the bottom of page 12 in the PDF. Leira ina eine Raya. Prat bedavar hergel, or heragel. Re'ei shach va'admar azaken shulchan aruch yeredea reish siman aleph. It's a halachic concept. You cannot prove that something doesn't exist just by saying you've never seen it, because maybe you just never saw it. But there's an exception to that. Something that is common, that if it did exist, it's something that happens so often that if it existed, you would eventually be bound to see it, and you still haven't seen it, then having not seen something is considered a proof. So the Rebbe says, it's not a proof just to say I never saw something. But in this case, it is a proof. And the Rebbe is going to explain why. Because there's a lot of mail that comes here to 770. Remember, the Rebbe is working in 770 for his father-in-law. So a lot of mail comes in here. I see the mail that comes in here. Re'isi kama mimichtovim hamiskablim lechvei kedishis meida v'chami admor. I see a lot of the mail that comes into my father-in-law. Shlita. Memachanam, from your community, meaning Anash in Paris. V'lei pegashti af echod. I didn't once encounter shia kosev mishum shahakosev niskarev ata lechabad bashpos mi me'anash hanimtza sham. I didn't see anyone say that there's a new person who was drawn to Chabad by the chasidim there in Paris. Boim heim be Paris ubesvivay seha b'maga im me'ois. In Paris and its surrounding outlying areas, you guys encounter hundreds of people. V'ulai im alofim v'alofim, maybe thousands and thousands of people. Mi'achenu b'nei Yisrael, of Jews, ken yirbu, may they increase. Al pi masha kosev harambam be'inyan adibur, regarding what the Rambam writes. Rambam writes in his commentary in Pirkei Avos, in Perek Aleph, Mishnah Yud Zayin, where it talks about shsika, about the benefits of silence. So the Rambam says that even though it's important to be silent, inevitably, it's unavoidable. People talk. That's what you do. You encounter people and you talk and you have different conversations. It's just kind of unavoidable. So according to what the Rambam says, you do end up speaking to people. There's no way you live in a major city with thousands of Jews that you come in contact with on a regular basis and that you don't have conversations with them. Obviously, you talk about something with them. So what are you talking about with them? And why do you never mention to them the possibility of writing to the Rebbe? Kama noshim mikol elu alafim panu b'shayla al dvar nituach eishidach. How many of these people that you have encountered, that you speak to, you're already speaking to them. You're already speaking to them. How many of them have written to the Rebbe about an operation or about a match, a marriage match? Because bracha l'Rosh Hashanah. How many of them wrote in asking for a blessing for the new year? I didn't see it. I didn't see it, not once. V'umnam. Im hoyu misaprim lahem mahu haRebbe Lubavitch. If you would speak to them, who is the Rebbe? Who's the Lubavitch Rebbe? Sipur. Tell them a story. Here the Rebbe is giving us the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. This is how you do it. How do you speak to a cold stranger who doesn't know anything about the Rebbe? How do you get the conversation to a place where you don't sound weird telling them to write to the Rebbe or to give Maimed money to the Rebbe? So first you tell them a sipur, you tell them a story. Tell them a story about the Rebbe. Gam bloi biur, even without an explanation. Stories all have deep explanations. You don't have to tell them the explanation. Just tell a story. But pamashniya, this is a process. And then the second time, miktus misichaisov, you tell them a vart from a sicha, not the whole sicha. Don't tell them the whole sicha. Don't the question, the answer. Oh, but that's not enough. We still have to understand. A part, one line from a sicha. Yeah. V'achar kach mehiroisov, then you tell them one of his directives, something that he told people to do. Harei kama v'kama nefashis, heim v'zaram, v'zera zaram ad ein sof. If you would do that, then many souls and their descendants for eternity, hoyu miskashem al yodem bi'elon dechai, would all become connected to the tree of life. Sometimes chasidim refer to the Rebbe as the tree of life. Meisifim oyer b'batehem, and you know what would happen? It would increase the spiritual light in these people's homes. Nasim anshe Moshe, and they would become men of Moses. Here's a little scholarly parenthetical paragraph where the Rebbe explains what anshe Moshe means, men of Moses. Remember earlier we said that this letter included a kuntras, a pamphlet of a mimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So the Rebbe refers to that now. See the end of the mimer that I enclosed here. Teira Oyer is the Alter Rebbe, Teira Chaim is the Mittler Rebbe. Dibur Maschel Vasisa Tzitz. They both have a mimer that starts Vasisa Tzitz. Hakavon about Anshe Moshe. It's explained over there that men of Moses means bittul, humble people. But here in this discourse that I'm sending you, men of Moses means men of Moses, men who are connected to Moses, to the Moshe Rabbeinu. He says here, the continuation or the extension of Moses in the generation. And that's why it's not explained there explicitly. I think that I was saying because it's a little bit of a chiddush of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Naisim anshe maimed. So what would happen? These people would become anshe Moshe. They would become anshe maimed. They become people who send in maimed money. Umachazikim gam b'chol hamestis b'chefetz leiv b'sever panim yafes v'lei rak mipnei hakavod. And they'd become supporters of the Rebbe's organizations, and not just to humor you, not just out of respect for you. Utmuras kolonal, and instead of all of this, this guy is dealing with his organization, and that guy is dealing with his business. It's interesting, by the way, because even a maisid implies some type of, it's a spiritual activity. Maybe it's a cheder where he's teaching Lubavitcher kids, which is holy. It's very holy, and the Rebbe is saying, but the chasidim, who could be this army going out and connecting all types of Jews from all walks of life to the Rebbe, instead, what are they focused on? On their own projects. This one with his moised and this one with his business. Kol echad margia es atzmei. They all comfort themselves and say, I give plenty of nifne. I give nifne. Matzdikim es atme bezesh min amuchan. Kfi divrei kved teirase misiris nefesh bepel mamish. And they say, you know what? I'm ready to be meiser nefesh. I'm ready to sacrifice it all. Va'aveda kenira adayin loy huschala. But the real work has not even begun. So amazing to see. I mean, the shift that's, you understand that Rebbe is taking people who excelled in a particular mode of divine service. They weren't bad at what they did. They were excellent at it. They knew how to die for Yiddishkeit. And that I was taking those people and re-engineering their entire thinking and saying, we're going to take all of that power and redirect it to a totally new mode of service, which is outreach. Talking to people who don't look like you, who don't talk like you, who don't think like you. And if I can get on my soapbox for 30 seconds, and I'm going to only say half of what I really want to say. Sometimes we're so successful that we forget what made us successful. The Rebbe's formula for life and for blessings is to find people who do not look like you, talk like you, think like you, and to draw them near with warmth and with sincerity. Off the soapbox. Okay. This has been going on for over a year. There's tens of you. The Rebbe Rashab called you guys lights to shine. Illuminating lights. That's what he called you guys. You got to live up to that name and be illuminating lights, shining lights, a beacon for others. And like it says, it's actually a hayem yem. The Previous Rebbe said that when you put out a light, people will gather. It's an interesting phenomenon of human nature. If you put out a light somewhere, it will draw a crowd. So the Rebbe says, you guys were dubbed Neiros Lahoyer. The Tmimim were called Neiros Lahoyer by the Rebbe Rashab. And the Previous Rebbe said, if you put out a light, people will gather. So something doesn't add up here. Where are the people gathering? I don't see the crowd standing around you. But your opinion, he says to Shlomo Chaim, is the problem is with the people in Paris? No, it's not true. You put out a light, build it, and they will come. Put it out there for them, and they will gather around. And now I'm going to say something. I don't know how you translate derech hatzachos. It could even mean like humorous. Kol inyan hagolus hanoida hu al yedei shviras haluchais. Golus, actually, the displacement of the Shekhinah, of holiness, and the political exile of the Jewish people from their land, what we call Golus, is actually a symptom and an outcome of the breaking of the tablets, when Moses broke the tablets. Ki blav hochi harei hoya cherus, because otherwise, or rather, al tikra, there would be cherus. Why? Because al tikre chorus ela cherus. Chorus means carved into the tablets, but chorus is a play on words with cherus, which means freedom. So if not for the breaking of the luches, which were chorus, which were carved, there would be cherus, there would be freedom, there wouldn't be galus. Hasiba l'shviras haluches hu cheta egel. Now, in turn, it's a whole process here. The breaking of the luchais actually was precipitated by the sin of the golden calf, Sha'az Chaza Zahama Dechet Eitz Hadas, which in turn reinitiated the spiritual filth that was brought by the sin of the tree of knowledge. Sha'al Pidach Rei Dibra Maschal Al Ken Yemiru Tafresh Tzadik Aleph Bo Al Yedei Miot HaYareach. And that in turn, the sin of the tree of knowledge, was caused by the diminishment of the moon. When God created the two great luminaries and then diminished one, the moon, to be the smaller luminary, Shabo Ayedei Shviras HaKelim D'Toyu, that in turn, this is a whole Chadgadya over here, and that in turn was caused by the breaking of the vessels in the pre-creative world called Toihu, chaos, Shabo Ayedei HaTzimtzum, and that in turn was caused by the original Tzimtzum, the original condensing of God's light. Umahu HaTzimtzum, what is Tzimtzum? Der geht nit luchutz. In simple Mamaloshin, Tzimtzum is der geht nit luchutz. The light's not going out. So how did the gullus come about? From the breaking of the luchas. And what caused the breaking of the luchas? The sin of the golden calf. And what caused the sin of the golden calf? Or rather, it was what was it a reinitiating of? The sin of the tree of knowledge. And what was the sin of the tree of knowledge? A result of the diminishing of the moon. And what was the diminishing of the moon? A result of the tzimtzum. And what is tzimtzum? When light doesn't go out. Sich in seine Eisius, aber nicht weiter. He remains in his own letters, his own way of articulating his ideas, meaning it has form, but it doesn't get articulated outward. It doesn't get expressed. The Rebbe said, he's saying this semi-jokingly, but I'm not sure what this even means, but to me it sounds like all the problems in the world come from one thing: when there's light and it's not being let out. You guys have the light. You guys have the light. You're sitting in Paris. There are people around you. You come in contact with those people. Show them the light. And this will take care of all problems. Yeah. The Rebbe says, I want to repeat something I said earlier in this letter. I'm not talking to you as an individual. I'm not talking about any individual. I'm not saying any one person is to blame here. I'm speaking about the group of you. Certainly you're going to show this letter to anyone that it will benefit. And it should be understood that this conversation that I'm having with you, it's a private conversation. What does that mean? And it's not like it says in Chumash that Yosef told his father about what his brothers were doing. The Rebbe is saying, I did not tell the Rebbe about this. I'm not complaining to the Rebbe about you guys. Chas v'shalom. This is between us. Okay? Doesn't go. If you want to show it to other people, you want to show this letter to other people, you're free to do so. Please understand, this is not coming from the Rebbe, and I'm not even going to tell the Rebbe about this. Bevade kama v'kama yemnu mi samcha geimer. Who appointed you? Toil chulu mi beinei necha. Fix yourself first. Take the beam out from between your eyes. V'yeh hatzedek itom b'tainosam olai. And you want to know something? You're right. You're going to say to me, who am I? Who am I to tell you what to do? You're right. Who am I? Aval einzeh mishana es hamatzav. It still doesn't change the truth. V'asach hakel and the bottom line. V'chaval al hazman ha'helich va'ave v'lei mishtakach. What a pity it is for the time that's already been wasted and cannot be brought back. B'tikva asher lo yakpid afilu b'meich al michtavi zeh v'es v'ohev b'sufa. I hope you're not going to take this personally, not even intellectually, on an intellectual level. And that there will be love in the end. This is an expression from the Gemara, from Kedushin, Daf Lamed Omid Beis, where it says, even when Talmidei Chachamim fight over a concept, understanding something properly, not even when they fight, especially when they fight, it brings them greater love after the fight. I'm concluding with wishes of peace for the whole group. I did not show this letter to the Nifna committee here in New York. I sent a copy of just chapter 6. Chapter 6 is just what we learned here. Just this part. I just sent chapter 6 to Ben Shem Tov. And the Rebbe is going to explain why he sent it to Ben Shem Tov. I didn't tell him who the letter was to. You can do whatever you want. You want to let him know that it was you? You can, or you want to keep it secret? Again, you're free to do as you wish. And now the Rebbe explains, and I want to tell you why I sent just chapter 6 to Ben Shem Tov. Aleph, one reason is Ula Yoyel Lavedasehu. Maybe it'll help him. Maybe he needs to hear this too. Base, Biyesi Paris. When I was in Paris, remember that Rebbe was in Paris a year and a half earlier. Shoket Gam Kein Belimud Snegoria al Heder Hispashtus Ba'aveda. He was also coming up with defense pleas, with mitigating arguments on behalf of why Anash were not doing this work. And he was very sure that it would catch on in the future. So the Rebbe says, I told Ben Shem Tov there's a problem over here with the chasidim in Paris. They're not involved in outreach. And he told me there's reasons why, and it's not their fault. And I'm sure it's going to start very soon. And since I see that it didn't start, I'm kind of following up on that conversation. Okay, wow. This was, I told you it was going to take us a long time, but Baruch Hashem, we got through it. And let's remember that if you know the address, it's weird not to tell people. Okay, we'll see you, God willing, next Thursday night with another letter. Good night.